I want you to think about the last important choice you made today.
Hmm.
Maybe it was what to prioritize in a big meeting, or how to respond to a frustrating email from a colleague, or even something as simple as deciding to hit play on this deep dive.
Mm.
Now, ask yourself, did you truly author that choice?
Right.
Or was your profound sense of being in control just an incredibly convincing, elaborate illusion?
That specific question usually sends us down a very predictable and honestly, a very messy rabbit
Oh,
hole.
definitely.
We end up debating the latest neuroscience of the brain, or getting lost in the theoretical physics of a deterministic universe, or we just throw our hands up in frustration and say the human mind is simply too complicated to measure.
We just give up.
Exactly. But the source material we are exploring today takes a completely different and arguably much more dangerous route to answer that question.
Dangerous to our egos, definitely. We are looking at a fascinating, rigorously argued text called Before You Read the Proof.
Hmm.
And the mission of our deep dive today is to explore a radically different approach to the centuries-old free will debate.
Yes.
We are not going to look at brain scans, we aren't measuring dopamine, and we aren't looking at quantum mechanics. We're looking at a formal, logical proof.
Right, and the author's central premise here is that the free will debate has only survived for hundreds of years because people on all sides of the argument use incredibly loose definitions.
They just move the goalposts.
They do. Different philosophical camps essentially change the meaning of the words mid-conversation so they can claim victory. This text argues that when you define the word strictly, when you actually look at the structural mechanics of what the words free and will mean free will, isn't just unlikely. It is a structural contradiction.
It's logically impossible. It's like talking about a married bachelor.
Right.
Or a four-sided triangle.
Yeah.
The words themselves cancel each other out by definition, and that is a huge paradigm shift.
Huge.
It means no new scientific discovery, no new map of the human connectome is ever going to save free will, because the problem isn't empirical. The problem is definitional.
What's fascinating here is that the author places the entire burden of proof on those definitions. They argue that if you look at the fundamental architecture of the words free and will in any conceivable universe, regardless of the laws of physics, those two concepts fundamentally exclude each other.
Okay, let's unpack this, because we need to start exactly where the text starts, with the anatomy of will.
Right.
If we are going to claim that free will is a geometric impossibility, we need the text's strict definition of what a will actually is, because it's not just moving around, is it?
Not at all. According to the proof, will is not just movement, and it is not simply possessing a vague want. Will is strictly defined as goal-directed behavior.
Okay.
And to execute goal-directed behavior, an agent requires 5 very specific interconnected components. You need desire, memory, perception, prediction, and evaluation.
That's a lot of moving parts.
It is. You cannot have will missing any of these. You have to perceive your current state, evaluate it against a memory of past states, predict future outcomes of your actions, and most critically, you have to possess a desire to reach a preferred state.
Let's slow that down and apply it, because those 5 components are a lot to juggle. Let's say I'm sitting on the couch and I decide to put on a sweater.
Perfect example.
I have to perceive that I am currently cold. I have to have a memory that wearing a sweater makes me warmer. I have to predict that putting the sweater on now will result in me being warmer in the future.
Yeah.
I evaluate that being warm is better than being cold.
Yeah.
And driving all of that is the desire to actually be warm.
That is a perfect translation of the mechanics. And out of those 5 components, desire is the foundational engine.
The engine, right.
Without desire, there is no preferred state. If there is no preferred state, there is no goal. If there is no goal, there can be no goal-directed behavior. The entire architecture of will collapses without desire functioning as the engine.
Which means we need to put desire under the microscope. If desire is the load-bearing concept, how does the text define it?
The text outlines 4 very strict analytical conditions for desire. If any of these are missing, you aren't experiencing desire. The first condition is gap representation.
Gap representation.
Right. To desire something, you have to internally model where you currently are versus where you want to be. And you must represent those 2 states as different. This immediately means you need causal contact with the world you have to perceive your current state. And your preferred state must be built from some past causal history or exposure.
So I can't desire to visit Paris if I've never been exposed to the concept of Paris, or a picture of Paris, or a story about Paris.
Exactly.
I need that prior exposure, that prior cause, to even construct the gap in my mind.
Precisely. You cannot desire a vacuum. The second condition is motivational force. Desire must actively move you to attempt to close that gap. This is vital because it separates desire from a mere belief or a passive judgment.
Right, because I can think something is nice without actually wanting it.
Exactly. You can possess the belief that Paris is a beautiful city, and you can hold the judgment that traveling there would be pleasant without possessing any actual motivational force to book a ticket. Desire is the specific internal state that produces the behavior.
And what happens if the Wi-Fi drops while I'm trying to book that ticket to Paris?
Bleh.
Does the desire just vanish because I hit a roadblock?
That brings us directly to the third condition, which is persistence under interference. If the path to your goal is blocked, like the Wi-Fi dropping a true desire sustains itself,
It doesn't just quit.
right, it doesn't just misfire once and stop forever like a physical reflex. You maintain an internal representation of that unsatisfied gap over time. And maintaining that gap requires memory, which, again, anchors you to a causal history.
So desire has to survive friction. That leads to the fourth condition, which honestly was the ultimate aha moment for me when reading this material. The condition is dissolution upon satisfaction.
Yes. To desire is, fundamentally, to lack. If your preferred state becomes identical to your current state, if you successfully close the gap and get exactly what you want, the desire must cease to exist. It dissolves entirely.
Because motivation is inherently directional. It requires a destination that is different from your starting point.
Yeah.
If you have arrived at the destination, you cannot logically be moving toward it anymore. You can't desire to put on a sweater if you are already wearing the sweater.
The text underscores this with a rather profound linguistic universal. The author points out that across every studied natural language, they looked at English, Mandarin, Arabic, Sanskrit, ancient Greek, Latin, Hebrew. In every single one of those linguistic frameworks, the concept of desire inherently encodes a gap between what is and what is wanted. There is no word in any human language for desiring what one already fully and completely possesses.
Are you saying that in all those languages, even ancient ones, there isn't a single word for wanting something you already have?
None. Words like gratitude, contentment, enjoyment, or appreciation, those apply to the state of having, not the state of wanting. The dissolution condition isn't just an arbitrary philosophical rule the author invented to make the proof work. It is built into the bedrock of human language because it reflects a structural, inescapable truth about motivation itself.
So, taking all these pieces together, gap representation, motivational force, persistence under interference, and dissolution upon satisfaction, we have a very rigid mechanical picture of what desire is, and therefore what will is.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, we can finally see the trap the text is methodically set. We just established that will requires desire, memory, perception, and prediction.
Right.
Memory relies entirely on prior states. Perception relies on present states. Prediction relies on models built from prior experience. Every single component of the will requires causal contact with the world. It requires the agent to be embedded in a history of prior and present states.
States that the agent did not originate.
Exactly the point. Therefore, to possess a will, you must have the presence of what the text calls unowned causal influence. You must be influenced by things outside your ultimate authorship.
Wait, let me make sure I have this locked in. By unowned causal influence, we mean things like my genetics, or the socioeconomic status of the country I was born in, or even the fact that I saw a pizza commercial an hour ago, and now I suddenly want pizza. Things that happened to me, not by me.
That is a perfect summary. Your desire for pizza was constructed by a prior cause, the commercial that you did not author. To have a will, your mind must be shaped by those unowned causal influences. You cannot have a goal without them.
But the definition of free, at least in the libertarian free will sense, which is the version of free will that says we are the ultimate authors of our destiny, requires the exact opposite.
Yes.
Libertarian freedom requires the absence of unowned causal influence. To be truly free, your choices cannot be dictated by prior causes that you didn't author.
And there is the fatal contradiction. The collision is unavoidable. Will demands causal influence. Freedom forbids causal influence. The mechanical conditions required for a will to exist and the mechanical conditions required for freedom to exist logically exclude each other.
It's beautifully elegant. It really operates like a math equation. Unowned causal influence must equal 1 for will to exist, but it must equal 0 for freedom to exist. They cancel each other out.
Complete.
It doesn't matter what universe you are in, or what the laws of physics are, or whether the brain runs on classical mechanics or magic. The words are structurally incompatible.
This raises an important question, though, and it's one the text anticipates and addresses head-on. What if we aren't talking about a physical being bounded by the laws of physics or genetics or pizza commercials? What if we are talking about a being beyond ordinary causal constraints entirely?
Here's where it gets really interesting, because the classic theological loophole is the maximal agent, God. An omniscient, omnipotent creator who isn't bound by past states or physical causes.
Yeah.
The standard argument has always been, surely, if anyone in existence has free will, a supreme being does. But the text doesn't shy away from this at all. It actually uses the definitions of theology to destroy free will even more thoroughly.
It does, and it achieves this through three independent logical routes. Let's look at route one, necessitation.
Okay.
If a maximal agent is omniscient, it knows all future states and it knows the exact optimal action for every single conceivable situation. If it is omnipotent, it has the power to actualize that exact optimal action without fail.
So what you're saying is, if you possess perfect knowledge of the perfect move and the perfect power to execute it, you are never going to choose a suboptimal move.
There is no deliberation. The space between not knowing what to do and knowing what to do, which is the very space where choice lives for humans, simply does not exist for an all-knowing being.
Wow.
The agent is simply executing a predetermined output based on its perfect knowledge of what is optimal. Perfect knowledge combined with perfect power produces perfect necessity. The choice is an illusion.
It's completely determined by its own boundless nature. There are no alternate possibilities. And then route two goes right back to that load-bearing concept of desire. Specifically what the text calls the death of desire. We established earlier that to desire is to lack. But an omnipotent being can instantly actualize any state of affairs.
An omnipotent being has no gap. There is no state it currently lacks that it couldn't instantly have. And if it cannot lack anything, it cannot have a gap between a current state and a preferred state.
Which means no desire.
Exactly. With no lack, there is no desire. And as we established with our 5 components, without desire, there is no will at all. The theology, if you follow its own definitions honestly, eliminates not just the freedom of the will, but the very existence of the will itself.
It just vaporizes the concept. And if that wasn't enough, route 3 binds it all together with mutual entailment. The text points out you can't just separate omniscience and omnipotence to try and save one of them and rescue free will.
Think of it like a chess grandmaster playing a novice. To truly have the power to force a win, which is a limited form of omnipotence, the grandmaster must be able to foresee all the possible moves the novice might make. True power to actualize a specific outcome requires perfect foresight.
Well, that makes sense.
If an all-powerful being cannot flawlessly predict the outcomes of its actions, it isn't all-powerful. It is just very strong in acting blindly. Genuine omnipotence requires omniscience. They rise and fall together.
So the conclusion on the maximal agent is this profound, inescapable irony. The being designed specifically by theology to transcend causal constraints turns out to be the entity for whom free will is the most completely and irreversibly impossible. It's checkmate.
The convergence of those 3 independent proofs creates an incredibly strong logical barrier. You would have to defeat all 3 routes simultaneously to rescue the concept of free will for a maximal agent.
But hold on. If determinism and perfect knowledge mean the universe is essentially a fixed script, doesn't randomness at least tear up the script? People always bring up quantum indeterminacy. If the universe isn't entirely deterministic at the subatomic level, doesn't that tiny bit of unpredictability create a gap where I can step in and be free?
The text shuts this down with a very precise observation. Randomness is not authorship. If a random quantum event fires in your brain and influences your decision, you did not author that event. It happened to you.
Oh, I see.
It's conceptually no different than a deterministic prior cause, like genetics, happening to you.
So if I flip a coin to decide what to eat for dinner, the coin landing on heads isn't my free choice. I just outsource my choice to a random physical event.
A choice that is dictated by a random element doesn't make the choice more yours, it makes it less yours. The random element is exactly the part over which you have absolutely zero control and therefore zero ultimate responsibility.
Right.
Furthermore, subatomic particles aren't free either. They behave probabilistically within very strict bounds defined by physical law. Unpredictability within a narrow defined mathematical range is not freedom.
So the universe is either fully determined by past events or it's partly random. And both options permanently close the door to ultimate authorship. Okay, but what if I just define free will differently? What about compatibilism? This is the idea that we shouldn't worry about cosmic determinism.
Yeah.
Compatibilists argue that as long as you are acting from your own internal desires without someone holding a metaphorical gun to your head, then you are free.
The text highlights what it calls the ownership problem with compatibilism. It asks a devastating question. What does it actually mean to act from your own desires? We've already proven that desires are causally produced states. The text specifically brings up Edward Bernays, the historical pioneer of public relations and propaganda, to point out that our desires are routinely manufactured at scale by external forces.
Oh, this hits entirely too close to home.
Yeah.
So me suddenly deciding I freely wanted to buy a $40 stainless steel water bottle right after scrolling social media for an hour, that's Bernays in action. I acted on my desire. No one forced me to buy it, but the desire was explicitly planted there by an algorithm designed to shape my preferences. I'm just a clockwork automaton with really good hydration.
If you aren't aware of the external processes that produced your desire, you cannot logically claim authorship of it. And if you aren't the author of your desires, acting on them doesn't make you free in any meaningful, ultimate sense.
It's just following the script.
Exactly. The text argues that compatibilism is essentially a massive vocabulary maneuver. If you just redefine freedom to mean acting on your programming without physical restraint, you haven't solved the problem of determinism. You've just put it in a nicer outfit. The concept of freedom gets emptied of all the profound content that made it worth debating in the first place.
So what does this all mean? We've gone through the strict mechanical definitions of will, the linguistic universal of desire requiring a lack, the fatal contradiction of unowned causal influence, the theological trap of the maximal agent, the illusion of quantum randomness, and the vocabulary trick of compatibilism. Where does this leave us?
It leaves us with an open invitation from the author. If anyone listening or anyone in the global philosophical community believes they can formally redefine the word desire without requiring a lack, or formally redefine freedom without reintroducing unknown causal influence, the door is wide open. The author invites anyone to provide the formal definition that solves the geometric contradiction.
But so far, no one has walked through that door with anything that's synonyms. And for you listening right now, realizing that your desires are fundamentally causal chains that you didn't author, it might actually be a massive relief.
It really can be.
We live in an era of intense information overload and this crushing hyper-individualistic pressure. We're constantly told that we are the sole, untethered architects of our destiny, and every single failure is entirely our own fault. Realizing that the very concept of ultimate authorship is logically impossible can relieve a huge amount of that daily weight.
It forces a paradigm shift in how we view ourselves and others. We are all biological systems embedded in a vast network of prior causes, recognizing that interconnectedness naturally breeds more compassion. But this leaves us with a final, very provocative thought to mull over, building entirely on the logic of this source text.
Lay it on us.
If this formal proof holds true, and every choice we make is the unavoidable result of unknown causal influences and manufactured desires, how does that fundamentally change the way we look at our justice system? Our entire legal framework is built on the foundation of ultimate authorship and independent choice. If the concept of free will is a structural contradiction, does that mean the very concept of moral blame is as logically impossible as a four-sided triangle?
That is a question that could dismantle a lot more than just a philosophical debate in a classroom. It challenges the entire way we organize society. Thank you for joining us on this deep dive. Keep asking questions, keep challenging those definitions, and we'll catch you next time.